We're on to the book of Ecclesiastes today, and this is chapters 1 to 4. The first problem we hit is that I have no idea what the word Ecclesiastes means, other than I gather anything to do with the church is known as ecclesiastical, so I guess in that sense it's something to do with the church. Of course, the church then didn't exist in the sense that it does today, but there we go. It does seem that this is all part of the wisdom literature section of the Bible, so we're continuing this, and indeed it seems to be written by Solomon again. But he opens with sort of a bit of a tantrum almost. He's going on about how everything's meaningless and there's exclamation marks and lots of repetition. And he talks about things like with much wisdom comes much sorrow and with more knowledge comes more grief. It's a bit weird. I mean, that idea in the sense of everything being meaningless, that doesn't seem very coherent with the rest of the Bible. I only have a copy of the NIV myself, but there are some quite useful apps online where you can put bits into it and it will tell you the different translations across lots of different ones. And I put in this meaningless part and it came out with, I think it was 7 different ideas of what that could be or be translated into English as. The one that came up most is vanity. And I thought, okay, that feels quite different. But then actually you think doing something in vain, i.e. without success, kind of like meaningless. So it does all seem to be, no matter how you translate it, it is around that sort of idea. But the initial thought on this is that I'm not quite sure where he's going with this, because I say that does seem to grate on the rest of the Bible, that life isn't supposed to be meaningless, it's supposed to be here to serve God. But he's talking about being meaningless. I think it starts to come together a little bit as we go through. One thing I found really interesting, I was going to put it in the second anniversary video, but it didn't quite fit. But he talks about the eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. And goes on to talk about we as a people, we tend to chase the wind in that sort of futility. And it seems to be that sort of idea that as human beings, we're never quite satisfied. I find that a really interesting idea. So it's great to see it actually put out in the Bible, as it were. And it occurred, this is something I've been sort of pushing back against in my life for quite some time now, I suppose. And as I've said before, I don't really have any complaints about my life. I'm in a fairly fortunate position. But the human nature thing to just try and get the next best shiny thing, it's terrible. And I don't like it. And I can't say I'm particularly necessarily entirely successful in pushing back against that. But a good example that occurred is my car. It's a model that was brought about in 2012. And I've got a slightly later version of it, but it's 10 years old. And there's some more modern cars that I'm kind of interested in trying and having a little look at. Mine's getting kind of old, it's got lots of miles on it. But I don't dare go and look at one, because the trouble is I know there's a risk that I will want it. And if I raise that bar from what I've currently got, with which I'm generally very satisfied, it will be very difficult to go back. And that's a slightly ridiculous example, I guess. Although actually an even weirder example is my love of watching movies seems to sort of disappear. I don't know how long ago, 10 years maybe, something like that. But I can't help but think it coincided with the bit where you can sit on the sofa with a remote control and you can flick your thumb and you can basically get any movie ever made ever at the touch of a button without even having to bother moving. And sort of something in that idea, I suppose. But actually, at one point, I needed to go and get a VCR again, because I haven't had one for a very long time. So I found some old family tapes and I wanted to convert those, and I found a shop in my local town that has, it must be 1,000 videotapes there, and they're free for £1. So I started buying those and just trying those, and it's completely revolutionised my enjoyment of movies, and now I love movie night again. And there's something about that effort of having to pick something and decide in advance and put it in and rewind it, because whoever I bought it off hasn't rewound it invariably. It's terrible animals. And then enjoying this bit, even though the picture's rubbish, because you can't put it on the projector because then it just looks like noisy soup. But somehow that going backwards has been a big positive, even though you can't watch anything that was made after 2006. I realise that's a slightly odd example, but it's that idea that humanity has it built into us that we must go the next thing, regardless of whether it's necessarily a good thing for us. And I mean, another example would be, if I was left to my own devices just to eat whatever I liked, I would be... and it just wouldn't be good. So I don't think there's even a naturalistic explanation for why human nature would be like that. It's not like survival of the fittest, because actually, given half a chance, we will do things that progress us into states that are far worse for us, like type 2 diabetes, as it would be in my case. But I love that idea. And what I was going to put in the anniversary video, actually, was going to talk about the idea that potentially that's even evidence for creation, isn't it? I think, to some extent. Because it would seem like a design flaw in human beings. Survival of the fittest does not explain how we just have to go more on the basis that we will take it to a point of hurting ourselves. But it does. Christianity obviously has an answer to that. And then it's like, okay, well, I can't think of anything else that has an answer to that. And it's not going to convince anybody, obviously, but it's just another thing in that bucket of, well, Christianity has the only explanation for it. Anyway, Solomon, yes, he talks about having explored the pleasures of the world. And almost like he's doing some sort of humanitarian good deed. I was like, I'm going to go and check out all this partying and see if it helps. Decides it doesn't. And it occurred, perhaps this explains some of the bit why he's ended up with 1,000 wives and concubines. He concludes anyway that basically human beings, we can't do any better than to eat, drink and find satisfaction in our toil. I believe toil in this context just means work, so presumably meaningful work, which would make some sort of sense. And he says it's from the hand of God. From the hand of God? Yeah, it does say that. For without him, who can find enjoyment? That's right. Okay, interesting. I think we'll come back to that. In chapter 3, he lists a load of things that there is time for and then the time isn't for. For example, he says there's a time to born, there's a time to be born and a time to die, and a time to plant and a time to uproot. But he also goes on to say there's a time to love and there's a time to hate. And I know I keep coming back to this, but it's another thing in the Bible that seems to be contrary to the Bible, suggesting that because love your neighbour as yourself is not hate. So, yeah, it doesn't really fit. But a lot of the bits that are openly written by people as opposed to someone quoting God does seem to counteract that. The only thought I had on that, though, is that potentially hate doesn't mean hate. Previously, I can't remember where it was, we had a reference to if you don't discipline your children is to hate them, basically because they're not going to grow up very well. And yeah, in that respect, you don't actually obviously hate your children. So presumably that's hate again in the sense of shun, I suppose, something like that. He concludes anyway that there's nothing better for people to do than to be happy and do good while they live, which I guess sort of brings that back round again to, life is meaningless, but actually I suppose it depends how you try and make yourself happy. But the do good bit, at least that does seem to fit to some extent at least. He goes further to say that it's a gift from God to find satisfaction in food, drink and your work. It sounds kind of like hedonism, the food and drink part anyway, but meaningful work, that makes some sense. As it ties in a bit with Viktor Frankl talking about finding meaningness in life through your work. But yeah, the food and drink bit, how does that fit? But then Solomon's obviously a bit of a flawed guy, I assume, because he's got some very weird ideas on women and had 1,000 of them. So, yeah, a bit of an oddball, but we have to just sort of see if anything else emerges from that. He also talks about a time that everyone will be judged, the righteous and the wicked. I think I've slightly failed to pick up on this before, because I'm sure there's been other mentions of judgment. It's not clear whether we're all going to be judged one day when the world's going to blow up in a Terminator style, or if it's just the day you die, and it's obviously individual in that respect. But yeah, I think I've sort of slightly failed to pick up that idea of judgment, but clearly society at that point has in their head that one day everyone is going to be judged, whether that's all at the same time or individually. And finally, in chapter 4, it talks about two are better than one. In the context of that, it seems to be talking about coupling. It doesn't state that, and it doesn't give you any guidance on what it's okay to couple with. But I guess again, sort of alludes to human nature that we're not supposed to be on our own. And then obviously some complicated stuff that comes out of that. But yeah, it's interesting. Good start to that, I think, anyway. There's, again, some more interesting ideas. Not sure I particularly like Solomon. Can't quite decide. Definitely some wisdom in there, but some crazy in there too, maybe. But we shall go on anyway and see what else we can find out.